Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the pod, episode 7, the JLL coaching pod. How to get good results in the gym. That's what we're talking about today. And in the gym and in training, and with a main focus on pain and performance. Now, naturally, when you coach people for a long time, there are going to be periods of pain. Anyone pursuing high performance will go through some kind of injury during their training career, and that is 100% normal. 100% normal. And that is something that I'm been very passionate about the last year. I should stop saying shouldn't I? By the way, woke up this morning and got my coffee dialed. I was talking to my girlfriend, and it's pretty interesting. I don't know if any of you make espresso or have worked in a cafe or whatnot, but there is like a recipe that works for almost every coffee. 18 grams of ground coffee, 2-to-1 ratio with water, so 36 grams out of espresso. And if you get that to happen in an espresso machine at 30 seconds, around 30 seconds, the coffee tastes good. And if you're too far off that, the coffee tastes bad. I just thought that was so interesting. How like all the coffees are different, come from different areas in the world, but this recipe generally works very well. And how? The coffees are so different. How does that work every time? Questions of the universe this morning for me. That's what I was asking about. But yeah, diving into a little pod. Pain and performance. So this goes down to the old question of physiology versus biomechanics. So when I first joined Third Space, the education coordinator at my club at the time, he asked me, we sat down, he was like, so you're more a biomechanics guy or a physiology guy? And that is just like, that's a great question. And it's come to my mind, again, my answer back then was I'm neither. I try to take both into consideration. And I think you need to learn about both, because naturally it's going to be useful. And I think currently I'm biased towards a bit of more functional anatomy and biomechanics rather than just physiology, but I also need to apply the physiology as well. Now this is going to make more sense as I go deeper into this pod. Obviously I've just thrown a load of big words at you. I'm going to try and break that down. So an interesting thing that I heard this week is humans, racehorses and race dogs are the only animals that actually get tendon issues and injuries to tendons moving forward, like in life, which is fascinating. And why is that the case? Why do us, horses, race dogs, get injuries? Well, and the guys that I was listening to on the podcast, they were arguing it's because we do weird things. I think we've evolved, like evolution is a huge lens that I think people need to look at training through and at humans through and performance, as naturally like we've evolved slowly over hundreds of thousands of years, and doing random things is going to have random new things, modern things is going to have an influence on our evolution, which has created who we are today. And like, I don't think we've evolved to lift heavy weights 6-7 times a week, or train horses to sprint a certain distance over and over and over again and not do much of anything else. Same with race dogs. So I think it's kind of interesting and natural that we face these issues that don't particularly make sense in terms of survival. When you're sprinting away from a lion, you don't really want to tear an Achilles, naturally, because you will die. So why have we evolved with these things? Why is it common in sports? Some statistics show that hamstring tears are more common now than ever. It's not getting better. Is that just because of the way we're training people, the way sports are set up, the way humans have set sport up? Who knows? So I've had a few clients naturally with a lot of knee pain, patellar tendinopathy, which just like some people get it when they run, when they jump, typical signs are you get pain when you're at rest in this spot just below your kneecap, before your tibia, tendon issues in there. And that led me down the kind of tendon rabbit hole, how to develop tendon tissues, because it's very different to building muscle. So hypertrophying muscle tissues, it's very, very different, because hypertrophy, I say it's very different, but there are similarities, of course, naturally. But tendon tissue is talked about to be dumber than muscle tissue. Muscle tissue has a lot of neurons going on. It's connected heavily to the brain. It can do a variety of different things, whereas tendon is just like this dumb thing. It's not got as much neurological activity. It's not got so much blood flow, and it's kind of dumb. So to train a tendon versus a muscle, we can look at it like a spectrum of velocity that you're going through different movements, and tendons tend to get trained at the extremes of velocity. So we would look at you holding a single position for an extended period of time. The tendons will get trained there. On the other end of the spectrum, jumping, elastic movements, tendons will also get trained there. But if you look at the main body of the gym bro or the gym broette, most of the weight training or training you do in the gym goes in the middle of that spectrum. It's kind of a typical weightlifting set. So you go through like whatever, 6 to 15 reps of an eccentric, a concentric, maybe potentially a pause, but probably not in most people's training. You just move up and down through a movement rather than holding a particular position for an extended period of time. Or you're not really jumping around or moving in and out of positions very, very quickly in an elastic manner, because that's not so biased towards building muscle, which is why most people are in the gym, let's be honest. So tendons react very differently to muscle. So I thought, all right, okay, in order to get rid of my clients' pain in their knees or in their tendons, we need to train the tendons. So we'll do a bunch of isometrics. And the theory behind doing these isometrics, again, this is the low end of velocity. We're not really moving that much at all. We're trying to hold a position steady. The theory is if you've got a damaged tendon, all of the muscle and the healthy parts of that tendon will get worked first during the isometric. So you start holding a wall squat. Remember back in the days, you had to hold a wall squat at school. You stay in that position until your legs are burning, your quads are burning. That healthy part of the tissue starts to turn on, starts to get stimulated, but then naturally it starts to become fatigued over time. And when that healthy tissue gets fatigued, the healthy muscle, the healthy tendon, once that gets fatigued, it starts to relax. And that's an opportunity for the damaged tissue, the damaged tendon, to get some good work and stimulate a physiological response. So get that damaged tissue to kind of be like, hey, can we make me feel better? So that's the idea with the isometrics. So you would hold those positions for extended periods. The healthy tissue gets fatigued or tired or relaxes in order to stimulate that damaged tissue. So isometrics are fantastic for really developing tendon strength, tendon health over time. So there's no reason not to do them. They're brilliant, and they do have good rates of success. And on the other side of that, I'm going to get to why there might be a few issues with that in a second. But on the other side of that, plyometric stuff, high rate of force development when you're asking your body to move quickly in and out of positions. Things like jumping, pogo jumps, leaps, hops, bounds, different plyometrics where you've got a takeoff and a landing, and you're trying to do that as quickly as possible. So you're jumping up and down. Now that's also a tendon dominant movement. The faster you can move, the more you're relying on your tendons versus your muscle tissue. Now the issues here when dealing with someone with pain and performance is it's almost like putting a plaster on a bullet wound. And I say that, doing isometrics, doing these plyometrics to get someone back to pain and performance. Sorry, to get someone out of pain and move them along the training spectrum to performance. The issue there is, are you addressing the root cause of the issue? Now, this is what I heard David Gray argue, Gary Ward's argued, that why is there tendinopathy? Why is there an issue with the tendon originally? And does just making it stronger actually negate away from that original issue, the foundational problem that's causing the pain in the first place? If it's a non-contact injury, aka not an injury where someone's just smashed your tendon and destroyed it, it's just you've put too much of something through that tendon, too much work in that tendon for whatever reason, and it's now in pain. So the other side of this, which I just love, like, yes, you probably need to work on the tendon, do your isometrics, do your plyometrics, develop that tendon's ability, get that thing nice and strong. But how do you address the elephant in the room, which is why that injury was caused in the first place? And that is probably because, potentially, I should say, but probably because something in your anatomy, something in the way you move, your biomechanics, how your bones and joints work together, might be loading some areas too much and some other areas not enough. And this could be caused by 1,000 reasons. You might have had a bit of pain, so you change the way you move, you change the way you walk, change the way you run to avoid that pain. And then that movement pattern that you've put on your body will have consequences moving forward. Naturally, you're going to load some tissues more and others less. We've evolved over the years, our body, with a efficient way of moving. When we walk and our body is working how it's designed to work, it's efficient. It's more efficient, and it's probably like why animals that we don't train probably don't have issues, because we don't put them through things that they're not evolved to do. We can tell how humans are supposed to move, quote unquote, based on the shape of bones. The shape of bones tell us how they should glide over each other, they should move relatively to each other. And that's how we can figure out biomechanics and how we should try and get our clients or ourselves to move in order to get them out of pain. The best resource on this is Gary Ward's work on biomechanics in a closed chain, which is effectively just like what he breaks it down into gait, but there's loads of ways. Gait is walking. There's loads of ways you can apply that to the gym, and it's just absolutely fascinating. And it goes through every single joint and muscle in the lower limb, in his lower body course, and how they should move together during the gait cycle. So for example, the foot, got 33 joints in the foot. You want to get them all moving with each step that's taken. There are certain movement patterns that you're looking for at different joints as you are going through every single step. So naturally, if you've got an injury and you're doing a slightly different pattern, or maybe you've got an orthotic in your shoe that's going to bias you to a slightly different movement pattern, that's going to have consequences. There's no such thing as a free lunch, and there's only trade-offs. So if you're not moving how we've evolved to move, naturally maybe you're loading a tendon too much rather than spreading that load across a bunch of different tissues. So that's something very, very important. So it's not just training those tendons, it's also training your body to move how it's been designed to move. That's why we have a bones first approach to training, looking at the different joints, looking at how the bones move, and then layering on the tendons and the muscles. So I think it's the combination of understanding these things, looking at the gait cycle, looking at the tendon's ability, and working on both of those two things in conjunction to get people out of pain and back towards performance. And this is the level of complexity and understanding that the industry needs to work towards. Because if we've got people in pain coming to physios or coaches or whatever, and they're like, oh, you just need to get that tendon strong, or oh, you just need to get your biomechanics in order. I think you need both. Biomechanics probably comes first. You need bones to function and move properly. You need joints to move properly as they've evolved to move. And then you need to layer on this tissue. Get this tissue nice and strong. Develop that tissue. I hope that makes sense. I will dive into it a little bit deeper now with the biomechanics. The biggest example I've seen since doing this closed chain biomechanics course and going through David Gray's foot program and looking on his education site is with the feet. Now, the feet are obvious. Now, the arches of the feet are something that's kind of talked about a little bit, but not known by many people, particularly in my industry. Like, how many people are getting their clients to take their shoes off and talk about the relationship with their feet for the rest of the body? You've got 33 joints in the feet, and they're normally hidden away by shoes and socks. And imagine like a couple of those joints aren't moving. Now that's no one probably will notice that. However, if your elbow is not moving, it's pretty obvious. So they kind of don't get the love or the attention that they need because, well, they're hidden and no one really talks about it. So you need a foot to pronate and supinate, which is basically the joints to open and close on either side of the foot. And that will enable up the chain things to happen more efficiently. And that's what I've seen a lot in my clients. People who present with pain or talk about pain, I'll have a look at their feet and see their kind of natural resting position. Are they naturally more flat or pronated, or are they naturally more supinated or arched? And kind of try and get those joints moving. And then once those joints get moving, get the tibia, the next bone up, the shin, get that thing moving in relation with the foot as they're moving. So like, for example, a client might have a flat foot. The foot is completely flat and it doesn't supinate. That means that up the chain, it's going to have consequences. If that foot's always flat and it never supinates, that's like the elbow not moving in it, not having any consequences on the shoulder or the wrist. These things will have consequences up the chain. In potentially. Sorry for interrupting the pod. I'm just here to advertise the programs. A couple programs in the link in the bio, in the link tree. Hypertrophy program if you want to get jacked out of your nut, and the fundamentals program if you're a bit bored of your training, you want to mix it up, you're fed up of just lifting weights in the gym and you want to become a little bit more athletic. Dive into the link tree and get involved now. Someone's knees. You can even look at the asymmetries between left and right foot, how they are at rest, how they are when you try and get them to go through this pronation and supination, and see how those joints act and react. So when you're in, there's two phases of gait. You have stance, which is basically the foot that's planted on the floor, and you have a stance leg and you have a swing leg. When your foot is on the floor, flat, it will go through pronation, and that is the flattening and lengthening out of the bottom of the foot on that stance leg, and that will allow the most efficient way to produce energy and to move as a human being. So when that foot is planted on the floor, that should go through pronation. When it lifts up off the floor, supination starts to happen, and when your leg is swinging through the air, it should be supinated before it comes back down and pronates. So it's like a nice cycle that just repeats: pronation, supination in the foot. You've also got other stuff going up the chain in the body, and that will continue. It just goes the whole way up. But starting from the feet, if the feet aren't moving, it's going to have consequences up the chain. So we can bias exercises for those two phases of gait. If someone is missing the pronation, we can maybe bias them to doing more exercises where their foot is going into a pronated position, keeping that foot flat, flattening it out, and training them in that pronated position so their body gets used to being under load and the up-chain consequences of pronating the foot, internally rotating the tibia, but that will and internally rotating the femur, and the pelvis will rotate away from that foot, which will lead to an external rotation at the knee and at the hips. Now, that's not that clear to talk about on a podcast, so that's why I'm trying to avoid it in this conversation. So I'll break this down as simply as I can. The joints in the foot need to move, and they might not move for a variety of reasons. That's something to look at when you are training an individual with pain in the knee or the hip or anywhere in the body, to be honest. And that can help relieve tension elsewhere. Getting all these joints to move as we are designed to move will hopefully relieve pain and go more to the origins of the issue of this pain and get people back to performance. One other thing that I'm going to dive into. That wasn't that clear, I'm aware of that. And that is because I think that needs a video of what's going on during pronation, and that is a course all in itself. So I'd recommend the Gary Wall course if you want to kind of dive into that conversation around feet and the bones of the body, how they should move, how they've evolved to move, and how that can potentially relieve symptoms of pain in the chain rather than just training the tendons. And I would say it's probably simpler to just train the tendons in a variety of joint angles and joint positions. The learning that's involved in going down how all these joints can move and are able to move is potentially the next step, and a good pursuit to go down, because it gives you a fuller picture of the human body and performance. Now, I've got written down here strength versus movement patterns. And this ties into this conversation because typically when someone's in pain, you might hear, you need to get stronger. You just need to get stronger and everything else will be absolutely fine. Just get stronger, get those tissues stronger. Versus the movement patterns, which is what we're kind of talking about here, getting those joints to move as one fluid picture, as one fluid body from the foot to the head. Just getting something strong probably isn't sufficient to get it to perform as efficiently as it can. We use different strategies to move, and they have consequences. So this is just what I want you to start thinking about. This is what I'm just starting to think about, to be honest. This conversation about, do we just need to get people stronger? Because I've got clients who are very strong in a lot of their muscle tissues, and it's much more to do with their coordination of their joints through space rather than just these independent, isolated muscles being strong. They are strong. Most of their muscles are strong. Of course, naturally, you can always work on these things, and it's all relative. And some tissues might not be as strong as others, and it's about finding those tissues and getting them stronger. But the reasoning why they might not be stronger, those tissues, is because we're not moving through movement patterns as efficiently and as effectively as possible. So, for example, if you are unable, when you pronate a foot, the joints open on the bottom of the foot. It goes like this. I don't know if you're watching the video, but the foot goes like this. It kind of flattens out and lengthens from this arch to there. And when that happens, there's a bunch of tissues, bunch of muscle tissues, tendons that lengthen along the bottom of the foot. And then when you supinate the foot, they contract. Now, when talking about this conversation of strength and being strong enough to be avoiding pain, if you can't lengthen a tissue and shorten it, you can't develop that tissue maximally. Everyone knows in the literature these days, it's a big conversation. training tissues in the lengthened position leads to great hypertrophy, as long as you're getting close proximity to failure. You're getting close proximity to failure. 1 to 4 reps away from failure, a nice hard set, you will develop that tissue. If the tissues are perpetually in a shortened position and never go through that length, then you're not going to develop those tissues as much as you potentially could and should to get a higher performance and less pain. That's just an example with the foot pronating, but there's the same conversation that happens at the knee with the femur and the tibia rotating. If the tibia doesn't internally rotate sufficiently, and it's kind of left in an externally rotated position when you are supinating the foot. It should be more internally rotated relative to the femur when we are supinating the foot. And if it's not, that means naturally some tissues around that joint will not be able to go through that full lengthened position, and we might see on, say, your right and left leg a slight difference between how they look and how those muscles are developed. One person's VMO on the right side might be way more developed than their VMO on the left side. That's typical with me. My right quadricep has looked in the past very different to my left quadricep. Whereas getting the foot to move, getting the tibia to move, getting the femur to move as they've been designed to do from this gait cycle that we've evolved to move in, that can potentially unlock the length in those tissues and then develop them more. And you can pursue more symmetry in the tissues around those joints. That is the conversation. So you're going to have strength in different tissues. If you've got compensation patterns, you're going to get stronger in some tissues versus others. If you develop better movement patterns, more efficient movement patterns, you will hopefully find a bit more of a balance and share the load that your body goes through over a greater variety of tissues, and you can perform better. You're not going to have any weaknesses in your movement when you go into weird new places, new positions. Now, this podcast has been a good one for me. I just wrote a few things down and started talking shit. I hope you got some value from it. For me, I'm using this podcast a little bit, this one in particular, to kind of clarify my ideas and talk through my ideas as I go through them. And a few things are harder to give examples to without a video or an exercise. So this conversation is open for discussion naturally. So I would love some feedback. What you thought about this pod? What could be done better? How could I give clearer details? Did you learn anything? Was it clear what I was talking about? Etc., etc. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. I hope you have a great day. Thank you very much for listening.